Welcome to In Conversation with writer and editor Sheila Bender, discussions on writing and the writing life, a monthly chat with writers, publishers, and those who support the literary arts. Today, Sheila is talking with Seattle freelance writer Glenn Fleishman, a tech columnist for several magazines and the publisher of his own venture, the online periodical The Magazine.
Hello, this is Sheila Bender, and you are listening to In Conversation with Sheila Bender, discussions on writing and the writing life. Today, we're in conversation with Seattle-based writer Glenn Fleishman. He writes in the tech sector for the most part, and he has had columns in The Economist, The New York Times, as well as other online magazines. And his current project is The Magazine, which you can explore on the-magazine.org. He's been a frequent guest on KUOW and other podcasting sites. Welcome, Glenn. I'm really excited to be talking to you about your writing career. Why don't we start with the new publication, The Magazine? Can you tell us about it, its focus, and what it'll be like when it appears in print as well as digitally?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on. The magazine is kind of an experiment. I keep calling it an experiment instead of a business. It was built and founded as an electronic publication by this fellow Marco Arment, who is also the guy behind Instapaper. It's an online read it later service. And he wanted to bring the same simplicity of reading to an iOS app. So you could, bring up on your iPhone or iPad, just get the words without advertising and just all the complexity. So he's a programmer and also has an extremely good design sense. So he built the app, he launched the thing, but he's not an editor, and he edits actually fairly well, and he's actually also a good writer. He's kind of a multifaceted threat, as they say. He brought me on back in October 2012, just a few weeks after he launched the publication. I suggested he might want a full-time editor to help out, and he did, and about 6 months after that, I bought the magazine from him, and I've been running it by myself since. The focus is, we started as being a little more techy. He always had the idea, which I thought was good, is that there's so much being written about technology and, review sites and gadget sites and things of that ilk, that he wanted to be the alternative for people interested in technology who didn't want to read yet another technology article. So people with that kind of bent and curiosity, that this would be stuff that was consonant with the way their minds worked without being another thing about another new gizmo or another article about Apple and Google. It would be about other stuff that would be of interest to those people.
Can you give me an example about what other stuff is?
Oh, sure. We've run so many things that I think are really, I don't want to say quirky. They're things that you would not just have come across in ordinary life. So we try to find things that are a little bit, offbeat. One of my favorite stories we run because it hits on so many cylinders. You're not supposed to have favorites as an editor. I know. You're supposed to love all your stories equally. And I love everything we've run. This one, for some reason, resonates with me because it has every kind of thing we look for in a story. It has a strong central character. And this is all nonfiction, but we really pursue that narrative nonfiction approach. So it's extremely well written, has a strong central character, has good reporting, and it's just something you wouldn't have come across, and the writer scratches beneath the surface quite a bit. So Soap Lake, Washington wants to build a 60-foot tall lava lamp. And there is a local fellow who's passed away just a few months ago. And, being in a town like Port Townsend, there are local characters. There's people who move there because they want to find something they can't find in a big city. And they sometimes set up shop, and they have a larger-than-life presence in the little town because they have big ideas. And they're often beloved because they bring a kind of energy that might not be there from the people who live there their whole lives. They want to do something different, and sometimes they launch festivals and celebrations. This fella, Brent Blake, wanted to put Soap Lake back on the map. It used to be on the map, and he came up with this idea, one of many, but this is the one that stuck, of building a giant lava lamp to bring people through and to sort of celebrate some of the history, which has nothing to do with lava lamps. So the story was terrific because Brent is this fantastically interesting guy. People in town love him. The town really rallied behind it as an idea because they're one of these dying small towns and trying to figure out something to get people to stop after the interstate passed them by. So this is the sort of story we go into. And then we had the added thing is the reporter had originally reported this story over 3 years ago and written a short piece about it. He was coming back and discovered that when Blake told him that he had terminal cancer. He had months, weeks to live. And so while he's reporting this, he knows that the guy who's the central figure is near death. And in a few months later, Brent did die. So there's just a lot about that. I think it's a very meaningful story. It's this whole town full of interesting people. And it's if you like interesting things, this should fit the bill. I feel like it's right dead center, and like there's just so many facets of this about people and even the technology to build the lamp. There's a local architecture firm that finally built a really great set of plans that could make it feasible to raise the money to do it.
I see. So right now, if we were to go to Soap Lake, we wouldn't see it. But if we were to read the article, we would know it's a possibility.
There's even, they got Target built a giant lava lamp in New York City, and that Brent convinced Target to send it to Soap Lake, Washington. It arrived, it was torn apart in pieces. They had to cut it into pieces. So there's a giant pile of like 50 tons of scrap in town now of a lava lamp they can't even use. It was 45 or 50 feet tall, but it turned out to be unusable.
So tell me more about the magazine then. Are people submitting their stories? Are you selecting stories from other venues? Are maybe all of that? Or are you writing for the magazine?
Yeah, a little bit of all of that. We started where we were saying if people, I mean, it started a little more of it as an essay publication, and it quickly became clear that we could afford to pay enough to get good reporting. Because I've been reporting for, over 20 years. I've been working as a reporter and partly in spare time and then more full-time as time's gone on. So I know what people get paid for medium-length stories of like 1,500 to 2,000 words where you talk to sources or even travel. And I felt like what we were able to offer for compensation was actually not terrible, not fantastic, but good enough for the right people where they could do some really deep reporting. And that's what's turned out to be true. So we started out more essays in a fairly close technology focus, sort of parallel to, and we diverged within a few issues to a mix of very personal essays, but again, with the sense of discovery and a narrative arc. It has to be some kind of story in there that's moving or interesting or hilarious. And these reported pieces, we often run 3 or 4 reported stories and 1 or 2 essays along with them. But so we have a mix of people pitching us stories, and I would say a large percentage of what we run are people coming to us with ideas, and we have to select, we actually take a reasonably large portion of what comes in because we get very high quality pitches because of our pay rate. And then we do a sign out. We've come up with some ideas and we find the right writer and we sign it out and they go off and write the story too.
So if people were to go to the website, the-magazine.org, Are your submission guidelines and pay scale published?
Yeah, we've been very transparent about it, and I urged when Marco owned it. Even then, I urged him. He was talking publicly about some of that, and I urged him, and he agreed to post everything out there because I've been writing for long enough. It's frustrating to not know what you're going to get paid before you pitch, and it's frustrating to pitch and then be told a story is accepted and be offered something and not know if that's what they're really offering to other people. So we just put it out there. We have a flat rate. We pay $500 for essays and $800 for reported pieces. And if there's photography or some expenses, we can go up. So we've paid as much as $1,200 to $1,400 for some articles where there's been a cover photo and some travel, and it's been a really interesting story that we felt was worth underwriting some of the expense. How is the magazine funded? It's entirely from subscriptions. We've got no advertising, and it's been, there's a funny footnote to that, but I'll say it's 100% from people paying for monthly or yearly subscriptions. And the footnote is that Marco Arment is a programmer, and so when he built this thing, he built an app for the iPhone and iPad. He built a website and all the back-end programming and server stuff that needs to happen. And he hired out a very little bit of design, which isn't cheap but wasn't vastly expensive. So Marco put in the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars of what it would cost if you were to hire a programmer or a programming company to do the same thing. And that is kind of a sunk cost that we didn't have to put cash out for. And then in buying out the magazine from him, I didn't have to pay that cost to him. I'm essentially paying him out on the basis of what I'm doing now. So I get the benefit of him being a programmer, and me being an editor means I don't have to hire an editor. So our economics are actually a little bizarre compared to most publications where they have to hire out for programming and editorial expense. So the subscription process is going well for the magazine, it sounds like? It's fine. It's actually a mixed bag. We started out very strong, and we've had a slow decline over time because early subscribers get what I call reading fatigue. Is that it happens every publication has churn. People subscribe, and then they find they're not reading it, or they don't like the publications articles anymore. Some people just time out. They've been reading it for a year, and they say, I'm just not looking at this anymore. I really love the approach. I get email actually regularly from people like that. So we have new subscribers coming in all the time and older subscribers aging out and unsubscribing. So we have fewer subscribers now than we did a year ago, but we're trying to branch into different things to make up for that, because subscriptions are just a tough road to hoe. You have to have a really huge audience you can reach to get the small percentage of people willing to pay a recurring fee for high quality writing. And so we have a hard time reaching that people.
That is the writer's dilemma. When you gave your pay scale, my mouth was hanging open with wow, because so many of us are used to writing for much less in return and financially. So it's to me very laudable that there's a magazine out there that preserves that model, that writers deserve pay for the work that they do. I know that another magazine that some articles from the magazine have appeared in is Medium. Mm-hmm. And I know that's a fairly new publication too, and I don't believe it's a subscription. Am I right?
Medium is an interesting thing. It's really what they call a publishing platform, and they are self-funded. It's the same people who founded Twitter are behind Medium, and they're experimenting. They're putting an unknown but seemingly very large amount of money into trying to figure out what the next thing that's going to happen in electronic publishing. So they're paying a few publications like mine to develop original content there. So I'm publishing some of the archived content that we've already put out. We have about 150 articles that have appeared so far. So we're republishing some of our older pieces there, and we're also commissioning new but shorter articles and paying decently for them there as well in an experiment to see what works. And they're willing to put money out, which is great. I'll take the money to try new publishing things. Yeah, and it means that I'm going to some of our regular writers are also writing there, so it's a way for me to bring more money to people who we work with most closely already.
Right. Now, I heard on the radio that the goal of Medium was to change the face of publishing and how we publish. What do you think?
Sure, that's fine with me. What we're doing now isn't working, because the big problem is the transition from print to electronic publishing has been incredibly rocky, because advertisers don't have to pay as much online to get the same benefit that they used to pay in print, because print was a monopoly and online is there's a much more level playing field for advertising. So a lot of the money in the system disappeared because advertisers simply are not paying. They don't need to, and so they're not paying as much. And Medium has no ads right now. They have no subscriptions. They're just letting anyone publish almost like a blog. They're working with publications like mine to get new material up, and they're also commissioning original work that they're just posting separately under their own name, and just seeing what drives people in large enough numbers to then build a way to make it all work for everyone around it. And they're paying writers well. The writers that they're hiring internally for articles are actually paying decent rates. They're trying to pay publications like mine decent rates, so they're not trying to cheap it out. They want to get the best possible content. And they just don't know, and no one knows right now where the money is going to come from. So if they build something successful, I'm all for it, even if it diminishes my ability to run the magazine as like an app and a separate publication, and I wind up inside Medium as a magazine inside what they're doing. If the math works and I can pay writers well and I can make a living out of it, I don't have this crying need for independence. What I want is to be able to help make sure these kinds of stories get told.
You are listening to KPTZ 91.9 Port Townsend. In case you've just joined us, our program is In Conversation with Sheila Bender, discussions on writing and the writing life.
Speaking of digital and moving towards the old model of print, what do you feel, especially since you have this Kickstarter campaign for the print version of the magazine, how do you explain the connection or differences or why we still have both digital and print for the same publications?
I think it serves different audiences, and it's clear with the decline of subscriptions on the print side that there's still an audience for print. There's still billions of things being published a month all over the world, and in some countries, print subscriptions are up. Newspaper readership is up, and publication readership is up. In the United States, the way the markets develop between advertising and even the cost of print and distribution and newsstands, it's just become more and more expensive, and in the mails as well, the postal mail, it's become more and more expensive to produce publications, and all these factors have come together to make it less appealing to people to subscribe. The cost is higher than it's been, adjusted for inflation. probably ever. And so that turns some people off. But I still think people want something palpable, like electronic media is still a different kind of thing. And people read books for different reasons in print than they do necessarily on a Kindle. That's my feeling. I think electronic media has a little bit less of a persistence to it in the way people experience it, because they can't go back to it in the same way. Your brain doesn't interpret it in the same way. And I should point out, the Kickstarter we're doing, it's for a book, it's for a collection. So I have the goal is not to turn the magazine into so we're every other week electronically or fortnightly. The goal is not to turn us into a every other week print publication, because that's unsustainable also. But this is sort of a test. I decided to see just how interested people who are getting a publication that's only delivered in electronic form would be to get a book it's a partial collection. We're taking about 25 of the 130 pieces we ran the first year, and seeing where that went. And it's a test to see what happens. And if it goes well, I'd like to have a quarterly print publication, because the economics of that work well. And again, it would be a subset. If we do about 130 articles a year, so the quarterly would not have 1/4 of those. We'd probably have an 1/8 or a 16th, so that it wouldn't be overwhelming. But again, it would be curated to be selected to be sort of the most intense, interesting, funny, whatever. So if the Kickstarter goes well, we're recording this before the Kickstarter is over, it's on track to fund, then that gives me a model to pursue, and also people who may want to subscribe to a recurring thing in addition to getting a book. I mean, I went through this pretty methodically, and I'm working with a design firm that does has done in the past a lot of magazine and book work, and they're eager to sink their teeth in. So we're approaching it. It's a book, but it's got a bit of a magazine feature design. So it'll be, I want to say, without being pretentious, it'll be a work of art. The idea is that it's a beautiful thing that people will want to own and look through, and then it also primarily has these great stories that are collected. So it's something that is visually evocative, and it takes advantage of the richness of what you can do in print. Is the colors, the intensity, layout, being able to see all of that, in the high resolution of your eyeballs on print in large spreads that we can't do in electronic formats now in anything like the same way. So that's going to be really intensely fun.
So by the time this airs, we will know the result of your Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah, I've done a few of these where it's like a Schrodinger's cat. It's we don't know when they're recording this whether the Kickstarter funded or not. It's on track now, though. There's a statistic that's 97% of Kickstarter campaigns that reach halfway to their goal at some point during the campaign get all the way there. So there's sort of a threshold, which is Kickstarter campaigns that do poorly, do really poorly. They make well underneath 50% before they fail. Only a few get to 50% of their funding goal and then don't succeed to get to 100%. So we're feeling pretty confident at the moment. Regardless of the outcome, it's a fun thing to try, because it lets you see what the interest is in what you're doing. I mean, Kickstarter is where people vote with dollars in support of your projects. And sometimes it's a clear pre-order. They want to order a thing that hasn't happened yet. And in a lot of cases, it's people supporting an idea. And so even though the magazine is a for-profit enterprise that's run by me, everyone knows this is not like a, mass. I'm not some huge media executive. I'm a single individual running this thing and trying to pay people well. So people are buying into the Kickstarter partly to get the book and partly because they want the experiment to continue. And the Kickstarter gets us into another kind of thing beyond just a subscription-based electronic periodical, and it lets us sell a book after the Kickstarter is over. So we do the Kickstarter, we do a print book, and I get extra copies printed that I can sell later, and we have an electronic version of the book that I can sell forever as well. So it gives us an additional way to bring money in than we have right now, where we're 100% subscription-based. After the book comes out, we'll be 80% subscription-based and 20% bookseller.
So will you be using the traditional vehicles of bookstores and distributors and that kind of setup for the book?
That's my plan. I mean, it's interesting because we're sort of like a nonfiction literary magazine, and those do exist. There aren't a ton of them. Most of them are journals like this are either literary or they're just a regular magazine. But you can find stuff that looks something like what we're doing. And there are collections in bookstores that are not as designed. They're more straightforward, just books of text that are nonfiction collections of essays and articles. So we'll be pursuing distributors afterward. Amazon has a program where you can have them handle fulfillment. So I can send them print books, and they take a very, very tiny piece, a surprisingly small piece, to ship books out for you. And there are distributors like Publishers Group West, which works with a ton of independent publishers, which we may be able to be of the right scale, even with a single title, to get them to work with bookstores on it too. So there's options for print distribution, which is great, and those are easier than they used to be too. And we could also send them out one at a time ourselves, and we'll do some of those. But the Kickstarter, when that funds, assuming we have about 1,200 to 1,500 books we have to send out, those are going out straight from the printer. They'll go off the press, they'll go into a box, a label will be applied, and they will be sent on their way. And then the rest will be probably a smaller quantity after that.
And the contributors to the print version, are they located all over the world or U.S.?
Yeah, we've had writers from, I should say primarily U.S. and Canada, but we've had writers from Pakistan, Australia, New Zealand, Netherlands, England, a lot from the UK. It's been a really interesting thing to see where people pitch articles from. And then we have some peripatetic contributors who are we have some modern nomads who are not particularly settled, including some who just are traveling all the time. They use Airbnb, or they stay with friends, or they work on projects, and they have no fixed residence, and they're filing stories from all over the place. We had one from one of our peripatetic reporters from Paris, she was in Spain at the time. She filed a story about these new meal sharing sites where you hook up with local people and you pay them to make you a meal in their house.
Wow.
And she did that across Spain. It was very interesting.
Mm-hmm. So I guess I asked this question partly to know about the content, but partly to imagine that you might have the traditional bookstore readings where people who are contributors to the print version maybe hook up with their local bookstore and present the book. As a person versed in traditional publishing, and I have attended so many readings and given so many, it's often a really wonderful way to start the launch of a book that's in the print world.
You know, I'm going to be embarrassed to say I didn't even think about that with the contributors. I thought about I want to plan a book party event here in Seattle. I thought about that, but that's actually it's a fantastic idea, and I'm going to do that. We have about 25 writers whose work will be in it, and I've been talking to them all along before we launched, during the launch, and they're all out there pounding the pavement trying to get their readers, family, friends, whatever, to support it as well, because we're paying everybody a reprint fee. The license that we have with them gives us non-exclusive rights forever. We could republish their work forever without paying more, and I think that is morally wrong. I think writers should always be paid when there's more profit that's being gained off their work, or photographers or whomever. So everyone involved in the book, once we are sure we have the money in, the project funds, they will all get a check, a reprint rate, and if we raise a lot more than the goal of the project, they will get a larger reprint rate. But this also motivates them as contributors to be out there to promote the Kickstarter, to promote the book, and like that is, and then I could work with them to do local book readings, and they could, get 25 or 50 books sent to their local bookstore and do that, which would be wonderful as well.
I think so too. Does your work appear in it?
It does not. I'm a very humble editor. I've written a few pieces for the magazine, not very many, because I wrote one when I was the editor, but when I didn't own it, and I'd actually pitched the article before I'd even been hired as editor. So I visited the Library of Congress's audiovisual archives, which are located under a hill in Culpeper, Virginia. I got invited out there by a curator, and I wrote a story about just the issues in preserving the nation's audiovisual past and limitations in copyright law. And it was terrific visit. And so that appeared in the magazine in, I think, November 2012. And I decided it was not a good fit for the collection. I thought it was sort of too specific and too technical, and I'm very happy with it, but it's not going to be in. I picked stories that readers had told us had meant the most to them, and the ones that we felt really just epitomized this kind of idea of curiosity, discovery, celebration, and that would last the telling of time, so that in 5 years you wouldn't pick it up and think everything in this collection is old. It would all be relatively timeless when you read it later.
That sounds excellent. I am wondering how many of your writers are local to Seattle or the area around Seattle.
Relatively few. Our nexus is in Portland, weirdly enough. Portland, as we all know, is this incredible, Portland, Oregon, that is, this incredible hotbed of creativity. And apparently, if you're creative, you move there. It's like Austin used to be or something. I think people keep getting priced out of cities, and people are priced out of Portland now too. But I think I have 7 or 8 contributors across probably 80 or 90 writers who live in Portland.
Right. It sounds to me like you better be contacting Powell's and having a reading right there with your 7 or 8 writers.
I definitely should. I should contact them. And they've been Powell's. I did some consulting for Powell's years and years ago, back when I knew something about book information, and that would be great.
I hope that maybe some of the Portland writers want to make their way up here to Port Townsend, which is a kind of hotbed of creativity, and we have a lot of venues for readings. I think that people love to be introduced not only digitally to work, but to the people behind the work, and I really appreciate you're telling us so much about the magazine and the behind-the-scenes work of a businessman and editor, someone so enthusiastic about writing worldwide and what it can tell us about what's going on in the world today. And like you said, quirky, interesting things that the major media don't just pick up and make big stories out of. As an essayist myself, I'm really looking forward to reading the essays in the magazine. I am speechless at the enormity of your project to take on so much. And now it sounds like without a partner for the time being, you're running the show digitally and financially and editorially and perhaps sometimes as an author. So before we end our conversation, do you have some things you could tell us about how your background, I know it's very varied from letterpress printing to writing the columns we talked about. How does your background inform what you're doing today, do you think?
Well, I've always been interested in translating things for people, I guess. I've always have an itch to scratch to learn how something works. And once I figure it out, I am terrible because I just tell everybody about how it works. And that's great as a writer. It's a great outlet where you stop boring your friends and you, your family, and you have a place to explain it. And so I think I've probably spent, it feels like most of my life. I used to work on like elementary school, dittoed, mimeographed newspapers and high school and college and then into, magazines and sort of semi-professional and professional stuff afterwards. I think I've always been explaining stuff, being the translator between something that's arcane or technological and people who are trying to grasp how to use it. And what's been fun is making the transition into editor and commissioning and occasionally writing stories like this. I write more like this in general these days, where I'm helping to tell the story of people, even if there's technology or something or science at the center, it's in the end, we're telling the stories of how people live and sharing them in a way that other people can understand. And that's what I love.
So you must be totally pleased with the fact that your career span is in the digital age.
Yeah, it makes it, the startup costs are much lower. I mean, that's really, fundamentally the reason to do electronic publications is that you can do it on a shoestring. I mean, that's really honest. Blogging came about and spread so fast because it hit the inflection point where it was very, very inexpensive to have a forum that you could reach people internationally. Even if 100 people read your blog a month, those were people who could read where you never could have reached them before. And some people reached 1,000, 10,000, many millions. So the economics of it right now are wonderful, is that I can have a very, very small electronic publication. I can have subscribers worldwide. Anyone can read on the web, and Apple has its app store in most of the world at this point where they can sell us a phone. So we can have a worldwide audience. We can have a fairly small number of subscribers, and the bills all get paid. And, it works okay. Everyone gets paid decently. And I'm just working on how to keep increasing the revenue spigot, finding more ways to get water to flow, and then be able to raise the boats, lift the tide and raise the boats of everyone involved so we all benefit from it.
It sounds like you're doing a fantastic job, and I'm happy that we had this conversation and the people out here in Port Townsend and anyone listening can hear about the magazine and be able to purchase, if they wanted to, the print version of the selected best stories from the magazine. So, Glenn, thank you so much for sharing your background, your expertise, and your enthusiasm. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sheila. It's been a pleasure to be on. Thank you.
Thank you. Addendum. Glenn's Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign ended up raising about $56,500. His initial goal was $48,000, with a secondary goal of $55,000 to allow for a better cover for the print edition and another 12 stories, that's 100 pages, for the ebook. Congratulations, Glenn, not only on raising the funds, but on finding your audience.
In Conversation is produced by Sheila Bender and edited by Charlie Fleishman. Production coordinator is Mike Schlexer. Announcer is Kurt Vanderslice.